Millionaire cruelly humiliated the cleaner in front of all the employees. 1 minute later, he dropped to his knees with what she said. The atmosphere in Thierry Dubois' office was as cold and detached as the man himself. It was early morning, and the first rays of sunlight barely filtered through the sleek modern windows that overlooked the bustling streets of Paris. Thierry, seated in his oversized leather chair, surveyed the room with an air of superiority. His tailored suit and impeccable grooming only enhanced his aura of arrogance. He was a man who believed in control over his company, his employees, and, most of all, his life. In his world, people were either useful or irrelevant, and Claire, the young cleaner who moved quietly through the office each morning, fell squarely in the latter category. Thierry barely noticed her. To him, she was just another faceless employee who blended into the background, like the plants his assistant tended to or the coffee that magically appeared on his desk each day. But today was different. As Claire made her way around the office, wiping down tables and picking up discarded papers, Thierry's eyes followed her every move, not because she interested him in any meaningful way, but because she represented everything he despised: mediocrity, simplicity, a lack of ambition. In his mind, people like Claire were meant to serve. They had no place trying to rise above their station. "Claire," he called out, his voice cutting through the silence like a knife. She turned slowly, clearly startled, and looked at him with wide eyes, her hands still clutching the cleaning rag. "Yes, Mr. Dubois." He didn't bother to hide the disdain in his voice. "Do you ever wonder if you'll be anything more than a cleaner?" Claire blinked, her face flushing with embarrassment. She wasn't used to being addressed by the CEO, much less in such a direct and humiliating way. I'm happy with my job, sir," she stammered, unsure of how else to respond. Thierry smirked, leaning back in his chair as if her answer confirmed everything he already believed. "Happy? You're content being invisible, spending your days cleaning up after people like me?" The room felt even colder than usual, as if the temperature had dropped with each word he spoke. Claire's face reddened, but she remained silent, gripping the rag tighter in her hand. Thierry enjoyed watching her squirm under his gaze, feeling a twisted sense of satisfaction in exerting his power over someone so beneath him. "Let me give you some advice," Thierry continued, his voice dripping with condescension. "People like you'll never be anything more. You'll never rise above this. You don't have the drive, the intelligence, or the connections to be anything but a cleaner. And that's your fault, not mine." Claire's lips parted slightly, as if she wanted to say something, but she quickly closed them again. The humiliation weighed heavy on her, yet she refused to let the tears pooling in her eyes fall. Not here. Not in front of him. Thierry, oblivious to the emotional impact of his words, waved his hand dismissively. "You can go now. I don't need to see you again until this place is spotless." Without another word, Claire turned on her heel and exited the office, her heart pounding in her chest. She moved quickly down the corridor, her eyes fixed on the floor, not wanting to meet the gazes of the other employees who had undoubtedly overheard the exchange. Her throat burned with the effort of holding back the sobs that threatened to escape. But she would not cry. Not here. Not now. Thierry watched her leave, feeling a brief sense of triumph. In his mind, he had done her a favor. He had opened her eyes to the reality of her situation, and if she couldn't handle it, that was her problem. People like her didn't deserve sympathy. They deserved to be reminded of their place. As the day continued, Thierry moved on with his usual routine. Meetings, phone calls, and emails filled his hours. But every now and then, his mind wandered back to Claire, not out of concern, but out of curiosity. He wondered if his words had any effect, if they had pushed her to realize just how insignificant she was in the grand scheme of things. By the end of the day, Thierry had almost forgotten about the incident. Almost. He packed up his belongings, ready to leave the office and head to a dinner meeting with potential investors. As he walked through the now empty office, his footsteps echoing in the silence, he spotted Claire's cleaning cart near the entrance. For a moment, he paused, considering saying something snide if she were still around. But the office was quiet. Too quiet. He shrugged, dismissing the thought, and exited the building, stepping into the cool Parisian evening. The city lights glittered in the distance, and as Thierry made his way to his waiting car, he felt a familiar sense of superiority wash over him. Claire was nothing. Just another name, another face, another invisible person in a world full of people who would never amount to anything. The next morning, Thierry Dubois arrived at his office feeling as invincible as ever. He was dressed in another one of his expensive suits, exuding confidence and control. His day was packed with important meetings, but none of that weighed on him. After all, he thrived on high-pressure situations. The world bent to his will, and today would be no different. By mid-morning, his team gathered in the main conference room, a modern space with floor-to-ceiling windows that overlooked the skyline of Paris. As the group settled in, Thierry took his usual place at the head of the table, commanding the room with his mere presence. Claire, once again, went about her duties quietly, her face still flushed from yesterday's exchange. She tried to move through the room unnoticed, cleaning up stray coffee cups and wiping down surfaces, making herself as small as possible. But Thierry noticed her. Out of the corner of his eye, he saw her moving around the room, doing her best to avoid eye contact. There was something about her presence today that irritated him more than usual. Perhaps it was the fact that she had returned at all, despite his biting remarks the day before. In the middle of an intense discussion about potential new investors, Thierry's attention shifted, and he abruptly cut the conversation short. The room fell silent as everyone turned to look at him, confused by the sudden change in focus. "You!" Thierry said, pointing directly at Claire, his voice sharp. The entire room turned their gaze toward Claire, who froze. The cleaning rag still in her hand, her eyes widened in panic as she realized she was now the center of attention. "Yes, you," Thierry continued, his tone cold. "Is this what you aspire to in life? Cleaning up after people who actually contribute something meaningful to the world?" Claire stood there, her face burning with embarrassment. She wanted to disappear, to melt into the floor and never have to face this kind of humiliation again. But there was nowhere to go, nowhere to hide. "I asked you a question," Thierry pressed, his voice rising. "Is this really what you want? To spend the rest of your life wiping tables and picking up after people who actually matter?" A few of the executives around the table exchanged uneasy glances, unsure of where this outburst was coming from or how to respond. But none of them dared to intervene. This was Thierry Dubois, the man who held their jobs, their futures, in his hands. Who were they to challenge him? Claire felt the weight of their eyes on her, judging her, pitying her. The tears she had held back the previous day threatened to spill over, but she swallowed hard, refusing to let them fall in front of all these people. She couldn't let Thierry see how deeply his words cut. "I'm just trying to do my job, Mr. Dubois," Claire finally managed to say, her voice barely above a whisper. "Your job?" Thierry scoffed. "A monkey could do your job, Claire. Do you really think there's any value in what you do? Or are you just too lazy to aspire to something better?" The words hung in the air, sharp and venomous, cutting deeper than any physical blow could. Claire's vision blurred as the tears she had fought so hard to hold back began to well up in her eyes, but she stood her ground, refusing to break in front of him. Thierry, seeing the tears welling up in her eyes, only felt more emboldened. He believed he was teaching her a valuable lesson, one that would somehow motivate her to rise above her lowly station. But in truth, his words were doing nothing but pushing her further into despair. "You'll never be anything more than what you are now," Thierry continued, his voice like ice. "You'll never have what it takes to be someone important. People like you are meant to stay in the background, to serve people like me." The room was deathly silent. The executives around the table remained still, their faces tense as they watched the cruel spectacle unfold. No one dared to speak. No one came to Claire's defense. Claire's heart pounded in her chest, and her hands trembled as she gripped the cleaning rag. Her mind raced, her breath shallow as she fought to keep control of her emotions. She wanted to scream, to shout back at him, to tell him that he was wrong, but the words stuck in her throat, choking her. After what felt like an eternity, Thierry waved his hand dismissively. "You can go. I don't need you lingering here, making this place look untidy." Claire didn't hesitate. She turned and quickly left the room, her steps quick and uneven as she fled down the hallway. She pushed through the door to the stairwell, not bothering to wait for the elevator, her body shaking with the force of the emotions she had kept bottled up for too long. By the time she reached the bottom of the stairs and stepped outside into the cool air, her composure shattered completely. Tears streamed down her face, and she collapsed onto a bench, burying her face in her hands. Why did he have to be so cruel? Why did he take pleasure in humiliating her in front of everyone? What had she ever done to deserve this? She sat there for what felt like hours, letting the emotions wash over her. But somewhere in the depths of her pain, a new feeling began to emerge. A quiet, simmering resolve. She wasn't sure where it came from, but it was there, building inside her, growing stronger with each passing moment. Thierry Dubois didn't know who she really was, but he was about to find out. The following day, Thierry sat in his office, going over paperwork and preparing for another series of meetings. The scene in the conference room the previous day had already slipped from his mind. After all, people like Claire didn't deserve much space in his thoughts. To him, her place was clear, and his words were nothing more than an unavoidable truth. The world had a hierarchy, and she was at the bottom of it. But Claire had returned, just as she always did. Quiet, methodical, and doing her job. She moved through the office that morning, as if nothing had happened, with her cleaning cart by her side. She avoided eye contact with everyone, especially Thierry, though there was something different about her today, something unspoken, but palpable in the air. After hours of meetings, Thierry stepped out of the conference room, lost in thought, but he noticed Claire standing in the corner, wiping down the windows. Her presence irritated him. How could she just show up again after everything, as if nothing had changed? "Claire," he called out, his voice laced with impatience. "Come here." She hesitated, then turned, slowly walking toward him. Her steps were deliberate, but her eyes held a determination he hadn't noticed before. "Did you need something, Mr. Dubois?" she asked, her voice calm but firm, as if she had come to terms with something far deeper than their last exchange. Thierry looked at her, puzzled by her tone. "I assume you've had time to think about what I said yesterday." "Yes, I've thought about it," she replied quietly. But there was something in her voice, an edge, a truth about to spill over, that made him pause. "And," he prompted, arms crossed, waiting for her to offer an apology or admit defeat. Instead, she took a deep breath. Her eyes locked onto his. And with a calm, unwavering voice, she said, "Thierry, you don't know who I am." He blinked, his brow furrowing in confusion. "What are you talking about?" Claire's hands trembled slightly, but she steadied herself, her voice growing stronger as she spoke. "You've spent years treating people like they're beneath you, like they're nothing. But I'm not just some random cleaner you can push around. I'm not here because I have no other options." Her words hung in the air, thick with tension. Thierry's confusion deepened, but there was also a flicker of interest. Where was she going with this? "I'm here because I wanted to meet the man who abandoned me," Claire said, her voice cracking slightly, but her eyes never leaving his. For a moment, Thierry couldn't comprehend what she had just said. The words felt foreign, out of place in his perfectly constructed world. But as the meaning behind them settled in, a cold chill ran through him. "Excuse me?" Thierry said, his voice low, a dangerous edge to it. Claire didn't flinch. "I'm your daughter." Silence. The entire world seemed to stop as those 3 words sank in. Thierry's face turned pale, his body rigid as if he'd been hit by a wave of shock that left him frozen in place. He blinked, trying to make sense of what he had just heard, but the pieces weren't fitting together. "You," Thierry began, but his voice failed him. His mind raced through memories, through the years, trying to find some thread of reality that connected to her claim. "I'm the daughter you never knew," Claire continued, her voice steady now. "My mother. You remember her, don't you? She worked for your family. She was just a maid, someone you barely noticed, someone who didn't fit into your perfect life. But she was everything to me." Thierry staggered back, his mind spinning. His heart pounded in his chest as a wave of memories began to surface. He had been young, arrogant, careless, as he was now. There had been a woman, a maid in his family's service. They had a brief affair. He barely remembered her name, but he remembered the relationship. It had meant nothing to him at the time. Claire took a step forward, her voice soft but powerful. "She raised me alone. She never told me who you were until she was on her deathbed. She didn't want me to know. She didn't want you to know. But when she died, I knew I had to find you." Thierry shook his head, still trying to deny it. "This is ridiculous. You're lying. This can't be true." Claire reached into her pocket and pulled out a small, weathered photograph. She handed it to him without a word. He took it reluctantly, his hands shaking as he looked down at the image. It was of him and Claire's mother, standing together in a small garden, a moment captured from a time he had long forgotten. His breath caught in his throat. The truth hit him like a freight train, obliterating the carefully crafted walls of his arrogance. The woman in the photo, the one he had discarded so easily, had been pregnant with his child. Claire watched him closely, her own emotions boiling beneath the surface. But she remained calm. "I came here because I wanted you to know. I wanted you to see me, not as a cleaner or someone beneath you, but as your daughter." Thierry's world crumbled around him. Everything he had believed about control, power, and superiority now seemed insignificant. He felt the weight of his actions, his choices, pressing down on him with a force he couldn't escape. His voice trembled as he finally spoke. "Claire, I didn't know." "I know," she replied, her tone soft but unforgiving. "But now you do." Thierry remained frozen, staring at the photograph Claire had handed him. His mind raced, trying to piece together fragments of a past he had long since buried. The image of the woman in the photo, her name barely a whisper in his memory, suddenly seemed more vivid than ever before. He could remember the affair now, the brief, careless moments he had shared with her. But the idea that she had been carrying his child, that Claire was his daughter, was incomprehensible. "This can't be true," Thierry muttered under his breath, his eyes still fixed on the picture. Claire stood in front of him, her posture calm but firm, waiting for him to process the truth she had just revealed. The silence between them felt like a chasm, widening with every second that passed. She could see the confusion, the disbelief on his face. But there was something else there too, something that she hadn't expected. Guilt. Finally, Thierry raised his eyes to meet hers, the weight of the truth beginning to settle. "Why didn't she tell me?" he asked, his voice barely audible, as if speaking the words would make the reality more painful. Claire's expression remained neutral, but her voice carried the emotions she had kept buried for years. "She knew who you were, Thierry. She knew what kind of man you were, even back then. She didn't think you'd care. And honestly, she was right." The words stung, cutting deeper than anything Thierry had felt before. He opened his mouth to argue, to defend himself, but no words came. What could he say? That he hadn't cared. That his past actions, his arrogance, had led to this moment. There was no defense for the choices he had made all those years ago. "I didn't know," Thierry whispered again, as if repeating it would somehow absolve him of the guilt that was starting to claw at his insides. Claire shook her head, her eyes filled with a mix of sadness and frustration. "No, you didn't, but you could have. You could have cared enough to pay attention to the people around you, the people who weren't in your world of wealth and power." Thierry flinched at her words, the truth of them piercing through the wall of pride he had built over the years. She was right. He had spent his life in a bubble, believing that his power and money shielded him from the consequences of his actions. But now, standing before the daughter he had never known, the bubble was bursting. How can I make this right? He asked, his voice cracking as he spoke. Claire's gaze softened for a moment, but there was no relief in her eyes. You can't, she said simply. This isn't something you can fix with money or an apology. My mother is gone. She raised me without you, without any help. You can't go back and change that. Thierry felt a wave of helplessness wash over him, a sensation he wasn't accustomed to. He was a man who solved problems with money, with power. But this was something different, something beyond his control. For the first time in his life, he realized that there were things he couldn't fix, things he couldn't undo. I'm sorry, Thierry said, the words sounding hollow even to his own ears. He had never said those words before, not with sincerity. But now, they felt inadequate, empty. Claire crossed her arms, her expression unreadable. I didn't come here for an apology. I didn't come here for anything, really. I just thought you should know. The simplicity of her statement hit Thierry harder than anything else. She hadn't come to confront him or demand something from him. She had simply wanted him to know the truth. And now that he knew, the weight of that truth felt unbearable. For a moment, the room felt suffocating, the walls closing in around him. Thierry had always believed that he was in control, that his decisions shaped the world around him. But now, faced with the reality of his past, he realized how little control he truly had. Why now? He asked, his voice barely a whisper. Claire hesitated for a moment before answering. Because I spent my whole life not knowing who my father was. And when I finally found out, I had to see for myself. I had to see the man who walked away from us without a second thought. Her words were like daggers, each one cutting deeper into Thierry's already fragile sense of self. He wanted to defend himself, to explain that he hadn't known, that if he had known things might have been different. But deep down, he knew that wasn't true. He had been too selfish, too absorbed in his own world to care about anyone else. I didn't walk away, Thierry said softly, his voice filled with regret. I didn't even know. Claire shook her head. That doesn't change anything. My mother gave everything to raise me, and you gave nothing. The truth of her words settled over him like a suffocating blanket. Thierry had built his life on power, wealth, and control, but none of that mattered now. He had failed in the most fundamental way, as a man, as a father. I wish I could change it, Thierry said, his voice breaking. Claire looked at him for a long moment, her expression unreadable. Finally, she sighed and shook her head. It's too late for that. My mother's gone, and I didn't come here for you to try and make up for the past. I just thought you should know who I am. With that, she turned and walked out of the office, leaving Thierry standing there, holding the photograph in his trembling hands. The weight of her words, of her existence, pressed down on him like a tidal wave, threatening to drown him in regret. As the door closed behind her, Thierry sank into his chair, staring blankly at the photo in his hand. He had spent his entire life believing that his power and wealth could fix anything. But now, faced with the truth, he realized how powerless he truly was. The hours after Claire's revelation passed in a blur for Thierry. His mind, usually so sharp and calculating, was now clouded with guilt and regret. He couldn't focus on the stack of documents that lay in front of him, the numbers and charts blurring together as his thoughts kept circling back to the same place. Claire's words, her face, and the unmistakable truth she had delivered. Thierry had always believed he could control everything in his life. He had built an empire through sheer willpower and an unrelenting belief in his own superiority. But this was something he couldn't manipulate, something he couldn't erase with money or charm. He had lost something precious long before he even knew it existed. By the end of the day, Thierry knew he had to do something. He couldn't just let Claire walk out of his life the way her mother had. He had to make amends, to find a way to reach her. But how could he? Where could he even begin? The following morning, Thierry arrived at the office earlier than usual, his thoughts already consumed with what he needed to do. He wasn't used to feeling this way, uncertain, vulnerable. It was unsettling. But for the first time, he understood that his usual methods wouldn't work here. Money, power, none of that mattered. What Claire wanted was something far more valuable, and it terrified him to realize he wasn't sure if he could give it. When Claire arrived at the office, she looked the same as she always did, quiet, composed, and professional. But there was a distance now, a coldness that Thierry could feel from across the room. It was as if a wall had gone up between them, and he had no idea how to break it down. He waited for the right moment, watching her as she moved around the office, going about her usual tasks. His mind raced, trying to find the right words, the right approach, but nothing seemed sufficient. Finally, he stood from his desk and crossed the room toward her. "Claire," he said softly, his voice hesitant in a way it had never been before. She turned to face him, her expression unreadable. "Yes, Mr. Dubois." Her use of his formal title cut through him. He had always been Mr. Dubois to her, but now it felt like a wall of separation he had no power to tear down. I want to talk," Thierry stammered, feeling the unfamiliar weight of vulnerability settle over him. Claire raised an eyebrow, but her face remained calm. "About what?" Thierry glanced around, suddenly aware that this wasn't the place for the conversation he needed to have. "Not here. Can we go somewhere more private, please?" She hesitated for a moment, clearly weighing the request in her mind. After a brief pause, she nodded. "Fine." They made their way down the corridor to one of the smaller, more intimate meeting rooms. Once inside, Thierry closed the door behind them and turned to face Claire, unsure of where to begin. The room felt too small, the air thick with unspoken emotions. I don't know how to start," Thierry admitted, running a hand through his hair in frustration. He had never been this unprepared in his life, and the feeling of helplessness was unsettling. Claire crossed her arms, her gaze steady. "You don't have to say anything, Mr. Dubois. I already said what I needed to say." Her words stung, but Thierry knew she was right. She didn't owe him anything. But still, he couldn't let it end like this. "I know I've made mistakes," Thierry began, his voice soft but sincere, "and I know I can't change the past, but I want to. I need to try to make this right." Claire's expression didn't change. "You can't make it right. My mother is gone. She raised me without you. You weren't there, and nothing you say or do can change that." Thierry's chest tightened. He had always prided himself on being a man who could fix anything. But now he was faced with the harsh reality that some things were beyond repair. "I know," he said, his voice barely above a whisper, "but I want to be part of your life now. I don't want to lose you too." Claire's gaze softened slightly, but there was still a distance in her eyes. "I didn't come here for you to fix anything. I came because I thought you deserved to know the truth. That's it." Thierry took a step closer, his heart pounding in his chest. "But now that I know, I can't just walk away. Please, Claire, let me try. Let me be a father to you." The room fell silent, the tension between them almost unbearable. Claire didn't speak for what felt like an eternity. Finally, she sighed and shook her head. "You don't get it, do you?" she said quietly. "This isn't about you being a father to me. You missed that chance a long time ago. My mother was both my parents. She was everything to me. You weren't there. And now it's too late." Her words were like a knife to Thierry's heart. He had been too late. He had lost something precious before he even realized it was his to lose. "I'm sorry," Thierry said, his voice breaking. "I'm so sorry." Claire looked at him for a long moment, her expression unreadable. "I know you are," she said softly. "But sorry doesn't change anything. It doesn't bring her back, and it doesn't undo the years we spent without you." Tears welled up in Thierry's eyes, and for the first time in his life, he let them fall. He had spent years building walls of arrogance, but now, faced with the reality of what he had lost, those walls crumbled. He was just a man, a flawed, broken man who had missed the most important moments of his daughter's life. "I don't want to lose you," Thierry whispered, his voice trembling. "Please don't walk away." Claire's gaze softened again, but this time there was a flicker of something else, something he couldn't quite read. "You never had me to begin with," she said gently, "but I'm not here for revenge, Mr. Dubois. I'm not here for anything but the truth." With that, she turned and walked out of the room, leaving Thierry standing alone, the weight of his mistakes crashing down on him like a tidal wave. The office felt heavier after Claire left the room. Thierry stood frozen, replaying every word she had said. For a man who had always thrived on having control, this loss of power was suffocating. Claire had given him the truth, but there was nothing more she seemed willing to offer. He had been blindsided by the weight of his own past, a past he had ignored for years, assuming it would never come back to haunt him. But now, it was everywhere, especially in Claire. She was living proof of the consequences of his careless actions, and the more he thought about it, the more he realized how little he actually knew about her life, her struggles, or her mother's. Thierry couldn't let it rest. He needed answers, more than just the cold, hard truth of his absence. He needed to understand what Claire's mother had gone through, how she had managed without him, and more importantly, how Claire had grown up in a world without the privileges he had taken for granted. Later that afternoon, after trying and failing to concentrate on his work, Thierry found Claire again. She was in the back of the office, wiping down desks and emptying trash bins with the same quiet efficiency that had marked her presence for years. This time, when he called her name, she didn't flinch or hesitate. She simply looked at him with the same calm, guarded expression she had been wearing since the revelation. "Claire," Thierry started, unsure of how to frame his question. "Can we talk again? I need to know more." She hesitated for a moment, clearly weighing whether or not she wanted to indulge him. After a long pause, she nodded. "All right. What do you want to know?" Thierry glanced around the office, suddenly feeling exposed in the large, open space. "Not here. Let's go somewhere quieter." They found themselves in the same small meeting room as before, the walls once again closing in with the tension between them. Thierry sat across from Claire, trying to collect his thoughts. "I don't know anything about her, your mother," he finally said. "I don't know what happened to her after I left. I don't know what kind of life she had. And I want to understand. I need to..." Claire's expression softened, just a fraction, but there was still a coolness in her eyes. "You want to know what happened to her?" she asked quietly, as if the answer would be something Thierry wouldn't want to hear. "Yes," Thierry said, his voice steady. "Please, I need to know." Claire sat back in her chair, folding her arms as she considered how to begin. "My mother, Marie, worked for your family until she found out she was pregnant with me. When she told your father, he made it very clear that there was no place for her in your life or in your family. She was dismissed immediately, without so much as a second thought." Thierry flinched at her words, the familiar coldness of his father's decisions creeping back into his memory. His father had always been a ruthless man, one who valued the family's reputation above all else. Thierry had inherited much of that mindset until now. "She tried to reach out to you," Claire continued, her voice calm but laced with emotion. "She wrote letters. She tried to see you, but every attempt was shut down. Your father had the power, and he made sure she was out of your life before you even knew she existed." Thierry's heart sank. He had been unaware of the lengths his father had gone to, and the idea that Marie had tried to reach him, tried to connect with him, was a revelation he wasn't prepared for. "I didn't know," Thierry murmured, his voice barely a whisper. "I never saw the letters. I never knew she tried." Claire's gaze was steady. but there was a flicker of something. Pain, perhaps. Or maybe just a deep, simmering sadness. "I know you didn't," she said softly. But that doesn't change the fact that she was alone. She had me on her own, with no support, no money, nothing but her determination to give me the best life she could. Thierry felt a lump rise in his throat. He could picture Marie now, a woman he had barely remembered, struggling with a child, abandoned by the man who should have stood by her. The weight of his absence, his negligence, pressed down on him harder than before. "How did she manage?" Thierry asked, his voice cracking slightly. "How did she raise you?" Claire took a deep breath before answering. She worked multiple jobs, whatever she could find. She cleaned houses, just like she did for your family. She took care of other people's children, all while raising me. We didn't have much, but she made sure I never went without. She sacrificed everything for me. Thierry sat in stunned silence, his mind reeling with the weight of Claire's words. He had spent his life surrounded by luxury, by people who catered to his every need. Meanwhile, the woman he had left behind had worked herself to the bone to raise his child. "I'm sorry," Thierry said again, his voice raw with emotion. "I didn't know. I didn't—" Claire cut him off gently. "It's too late for that. My mother died when I was 16. Cancer. By then, we had nothing left. She couldn't afford the treatment she needed. She worked until she physically couldn't anymore, and by the time she sought help, it was too late." Tears filled Thierry's eyes as he listened to Claire's story. He had missed everything. He hadn't just missed the chance to be a father. He had missed the chance to save the woman who had raised his child. "I should have been there," Thierry said, his voice trembling. "I should have done something." "You couldn't have," Claire replied, her voice quiet but firm. "You didn't know. And even if you had, I don't know if you would have cared." The words hit him like a blow, and Thierry knew they were true. The man he had been back then, the man he was still struggling to shed, wouldn't have cared. But now, faced with the reality of what had happened, the regret was overwhelming. "She didn't deserve any of this," Thierry whispered, his voice breaking. "Neither of you did." "No," Claire said softly. "But that's the life we had. And now, it's over." Thierry looked at her, tears blurring his vision. But Claire's expression remained calm. She had lived through it all, survived it all, and now she was standing before him, stronger than he ever could have imagined. That evening, after Claire had left the office, Thierry sat alone in the silence of his office. The once bright city lights of Paris flickered through the large windows, casting long shadows across the room. His desk, typically covered in neat stacks of reports and documents, now seemed meaningless, dwarfed by the weight of his thoughts. For the first time in years, Thierry Dubois felt completely and utterly powerless. Not the kind of powerlessness that came from a business deal gone wrong or a competitor outsmarting him, but a deep, personal failure. A failure as a man, a father, a human being. He had been so focused on his success, on climbing higher and higher, that he had failed to see the people he stepped on along the way. Claire's words echoed in his mind, louder now that the world had quieted around him. "My mother gave everything to raise me, and you gave nothing." He had known, in a detached way, that his arrogance had hurt people, but it had never felt real until now. Claire's story, her life, was the living, breathing consequence of his neglect, and he couldn't escape it. He had always prided himself on his ability to control everything in his world, but this was out of his hands. He stood up, pacing the length of his office, trying to think of what he could do. Money wouldn't fix this. Power wouldn't fix this. Claire didn't want anything from him, no apologies, no restitution. And yet he couldn't stand the idea of leaving things as they were, with Claire walking out of his life just as her mother had. Thierry moved to the window, looking out at the city below, his reflection staring back at him from the glass. He barely recognized the man he saw there. The confident, powerful businessman who had once believed he could do no wrong now seemed small, hollow. The truth had shattered the image he had of himself, and he was left to pick up the pieces. But where did he start? How could he begin to repair the damage when the people who mattered most were already gone? The door to his office opened, and Thierry turned, startled to see his assistant, Jacqueline, standing hesitantly in the doorway. "Mr. Dubois, you're still here?" she asked, her voice soft. She was used to him working late, but tonight there was something different about him. He looked exhausted, not physically, but emotionally drained in a way she had never seen. Thierry nodded, trying to compose himself. Yes, I needed to think." Jacqueline glanced around the room, her eyes landing on the untouched papers scattered across his desk. "Is everything all right?" He hesitated, unsure of how to explain the turmoil inside him. Jacqueline had worked for him for years, always efficient and professional, but he had never shared anything personal with her. In fact, he had rarely shared anything personal with anyone. But now, the isolation he had created for himself felt suffocating. "Do you ever regret decisions you've made in your life, Jacqueline?" Thierry asked, his voice quieter than usual, almost fragile. Jacqueline blinked, taken aback by the question. Thierry Dubois was not the kind of man who asked for advice, much less opened up about his feelings. But something had clearly shifted in him tonight, something that had cracked the veneer of his usual self-assuredness. "Yes," she said after a moment. "I think everyone has regrets, Mr. Dubois. It's part of life." Thierry nodded, his gaze drifting back to the window. "I've made more mistakes than I realized, and now, I don't know how to fix them." Jacqueline stepped further into the room, sensing the vulnerability in her usually stoic boss. "I don't think we can always fix our mistakes," she said gently. "Sometimes all we can do is learn from them and try to be better moving forward." Thierry let out a long breath. He had always dismissed such notions as weakness, regret, self-reflection, change. But now, he understood that weakness wasn't in admitting failure. It was in refusing to confront it. He had spent years avoiding the truth, and it had cost him everything. "I have a daughter," he said quietly, surprising even himself as the words left his mouth. It was the first time he had spoken it aloud, and it felt both painful and liberating. Jacqueline's eyes widened in surprise, but she remained composed. "I didn't know that, sir." Thierry shook his head. "Neither did I, until recently." There was a long pause, the weight of his admission hanging in the air between them. For a moment, neither of them spoke, but the silence was less oppressive now. It felt like the beginning of something, an understanding, perhaps, or a moment of clarity. "What are you going to do?" Jacqueline asked softly. Thierry didn't answer right away. He wasn't sure what the answer was. Claire had made it clear that she didn't need or want anything from him. She had come to give him the truth, nothing more. But Thierry couldn't let it end there. He had spent too long running from the consequences of his actions, and now that he knew the full extent of them, he couldn't just walk away. "I don't know," Thierry finally admitted, his voice low. "But I can't leave it like this. I need to do something, even if it's not enough." Jacqueline nodded, her expression thoughtful. "Sometimes just trying is all you can do." As she left the room, Thierry remained by the window, his thoughts churning. Claire had said it was too late, that he couldn't fix the past, and maybe she was right. But for the first time in his life, Thierry realized that it wasn't about fixing things. It was about facing them. He couldn't bring back the years he had missed. He couldn't undo the pain Marie had suffered, or the hardships Claire had endured without him. But he could try to be there now, to take responsibility for what he had ignored for so long. He wasn't sure if Claire would ever accept him as her father. He wasn't sure if there was a way forward at all. But one thing was clear. The man he had been, the man who had believed his power and wealth made him invincible, was gone. and maybe that was the first step toward something better. The following days were a blur for Thierry. Every time he walked into his office, the weight of his past decisions seemed to press down on him more heavily. He found it hard to focus on his work. The endless meetings and deals that once commanded his full attention now felt trivial compared to the turmoil inside him. He hadn't seen Claire since their last conversation, and though she continued working at the office, she made sure to stay out of his path. Thierry noticed. He noticed everything about her now. Her quiet presence, the way she moved about the office without drawing attention to herself. Things that had been invisible to him for so long. But now, all he could think about was her. Claire wasn't just another employee anymore. She was his daughter, and he had failed her before even knowing who she was. One afternoon, after hours of struggling to concentrate on the numbers in front of him, Thierry knew he couldn't put it off any longer. He needed to talk to Claire again. He needed to try, even if she didn't want him to. He found her in the staff break room, sitting alone at a small table. She was sipping from a cup of tea, staring out of the window, lost in thought. Thierry stood in the doorway for a moment, gathering the courage to approach. He had never felt this uncertain, this vulnerable. The thought of rejection, of his own daughter turning him away, was something he wasn't sure how to handle. But he had to try. "Claire," he said softly as he stepped into the room. She looked up, her expression neutral, giving nothing away. She didn't seem surprised to see him, but there was a wariness in her eyes, as if she was bracing herself for another difficult conversation. "Mr. Dubois," she replied, her voice calm but distant. Thierry flinched at the formality, but he didn't let it stop him. "Can we talk? Please?" Claire hesitated, clearly debating whether or not she wanted to engage. After a long pause, she nodded. "All right." He sat down across from her, the tension between them palpable. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Thierry wasn't used to this, feeling uncertain, feeling like he was on the edge of something important but having no idea how to navigate it. "I know I've said this before," Thierry began, his voice soft. "But I'm sorry. I'm sorry for everything. What happened with your mother? What happened to you? I know I can't change the past, but I can't stop thinking about it." Claire's face remained unreadable. She listened quietly, but her silence made him feel like he was speaking into a void. "I want to try to make things right," Thierry continued. "I know I've missed so much, but I don't want to miss any more. I don't want you to walk out of my life the way your mother did." Claire's gaze flickered, but her expression didn't change. "Mr. Dubois, I appreciate that you're trying, but it's not that simple." Thierry felt a knot tighten in his chest. "I know it's not simple. I know I can't just undo everything, but I want to be a part of your life now. I want to get to know you." Claire sighed, placing her teacup on the table. "You didn't know I existed for most of my life. I grew up without you, and I've been fine. My mother did everything for me. She raised me, protected me, made sure I had everything I needed, even when we had nothing. I don't need anything from you now." Her words stung, but Thierry could hear the truth in them. She had built her life without him, and she had survived. But still, he couldn't shake the feeling that he needed to be there for her now, even if it was too late for the past. "I understand that," Thierry said, his voice thick with emotion. "I know you don't need me, but I need you, Claire. I need to know that I haven't lost everything. I need to know that I can at least try to be a father, even if it's not in the way I should have been before." Claire looked at him for a long moment, her eyes softening just a little. "It's not about whether or not you can be a father to me now. It's about the fact that I've already lived my whole life without one. I've learned how to take care of myself. I don't need to be saved." "I'm not trying to save you," Thierry said, his voice shaking slightly. "I'm trying to save myself. I don't want to live with the regret of never knowing you, of never trying to make things right." Claire's expression finally cracked, and for the first time, Thierry saw a flicker of emotion, a sadness, a pain that she had been holding back. "It's not that I don't care, Mr. Dubois," Claire said quietly. "But you have to understand, I spent my entire life without you. I've dealt with the pain of not having a father. I've moved on from that. I'm not angry anymore. I don't hate you. But I'm not sure there's a place for you in my life now." Thierry felt his heart sink. He had prepared himself for rejection, but hearing her say it still hurt more than he had expected. "I understand," he said softly. "But can you give me a chance? Just one chance to get to know you, to show you that I'm not the man I was back then?" Claire hesitated, her eyes searching his face. For a moment, it looked like she was going to say no, to walk away for good. But then, slowly, she nodded. "I don't know what that looks like," she said, "but I'm willing to see if it's possible." A flood of relief washed over Thierry, though he knew this was just the first step. "Thank you," he whispered, his voice filled with gratitude. "I promise I won't let you down." Claire didn't respond right away, but the tension between them eased. Just slightly. It wasn't forgiveness, not yet, but it was a start. And for Thierry, that was more than he had ever hoped for. The days after their conversation passed in a strange blur for Thierry. He was relieved that Claire had agreed to give him a chance, but the road ahead felt uncertain. How does a father reconnect with a daughter he's never known? How do you make up for a lifetime of absence and missed moments? These questions gnawed at him as he went about his daily routines. Claire continued working at the office, but their interactions remained minimal. There was an awkwardness between them, a tension that neither seemed able to break. Thierry could sense that Claire was holding back. She was cautious, guarded. He couldn't blame her. After all, what right did he have to expect anything else? He had spent years living his life without a single thought for her. Now, he had to earn her trust, and he wasn't sure where to begin. One morning, Thierry decided to make the first move. He had never been good at opening up, at showing vulnerability. But if he wanted any chance of building a relationship with Claire, he knew he had to try. It was a quiet day at the office, and Thierry found Claire working alone in one of the conference rooms, tidying up after a meeting. "Claire," he said gently, stepping into the room. She looked up, surprised to see him there. "Mr. Dubois? Please, you can call me Thierry," he said, trying to keep his tone light. He knew the formality was another wall between them, one that he was eager to tear down. Claire hesitated for a moment before nodding. "Okay. Thierry." He smiled faintly, though the awkwardness in the air remained. "I was thinking, maybe we could get lunch together. I'd really like to spend some time with you, outside of work." Her eyes flickered with uncertainty, but she didn't immediately say no. "I don't know if that's a good idea." Thierry felt the familiar sting of rejection, but pushed through it. "I understand if you're not comfortable with that yet, but I'd really like the chance to get to know you, even if it's just lunch." There was a long pause as Claire considered his request. Finally, she let out a small sigh. "All right, lunch, but I don't want this to be weird, okay?" Thierry's heart lifted slightly. "Of course, I'll keep it casual, I promise." They decided on a small cafe not far from the office, a quiet spot where they wouldn't be interrupted. As they sat across from each other, Thierry felt an odd mix of excitement and nervousness. He had spent years mastering boardrooms and business deals, but this was something else entirely. The waitress came by, took their orders, and for a moment, there was silence between them. Thierry searched for the right words, something to bridge the gap between them. "So," Thierry began, awkwardly trying to start the conversation, "what do you like to do outside of work?" Claire glanced up at him, surprised by the question. "Outside of work?" she repeated. "Yeah," Thierry said with a small, self-deprecating smile. "I realized I don't really know anything about you. I'd like to." Claire shrugged slightly. "I don't do much. I like to read, go for walks. I spend time with friends when I can." Thierry nodded, listening intently. "What do you like to read?" Mostly novels, Claire replied. Fiction, stories that take me somewhere else. Any favorite authors? Thierry asked, trying to keep the conversation flowing. Not really. I just read whatever catches my eye. Thierry smiled, feeling a small sense of connection. I've always wanted to read more. I'm ashamed to admit I haven't picked up a novel in years. I guess I've been too wrapped up in work. Claire gave a small, almost imperceptible smile. I can understand that. You've got an empire to run. Thierry winced internally at the comment, knowing that his empire had kept him from the things that truly mattered. I'd like to think there's more to life than just work, he said softly, looking down at the table. I've been thinking about that a lot lately. Claire's expression softened slightly, but she didn't say anything. Thierry could feel the distance between them, not just physical, but emotional, an invisible barrier that seemed almost impossible to cross. They were trying, but something was still holding them back. Or maybe it was him, his guilt, his regrets, the weight of the past. I'm trying, Claire, Thierry said quietly, looking up at her. I know I've missed so much, but I want to make it right. I want to be part of your life, even if it's just starting small. Claire set down her fork and looked at him with a seriousness that caught him off guard. I don't know if you can make it right, Thierry. I've spent my whole life without you, and I've been fine. I don't need you to come in now and try to fix everything. Thierry nodded, feeling the truth of her words settle over him like a heavy weight. I know, but I need this, Claire. I need to try. She sighed, her expression softening, but there was still a distance in her eyes. I'm not trying to push you away, but you have to understand I've moved on. I don't need a father. I've never had one, and I've learned to live without it. Her words hurt, but Thierry knew they were honest. Claire wasn't rejecting him out of anger or resentment. She was just being practical. She had survived without him, and now his sudden presence in her life wasn't something she needed. I get it, Thierry said softly, his voice tinged with sadness. But can we at least try? Even if it's not as father and daughter, maybe we can just be two people getting to know each other. Claire looked at him for a long moment, her expression unreadable. Finally, she gave a small nod. Maybe. But it's going to take time, Thierry. I can't just pretend everything is fine overnight. Thierry smiled, a flicker of hope igniting in his chest. I understand. I'll take whatever time you need. They finished their lunch in relative silence, but it wasn't as tense as before. It wasn't perfect. There was still a long way to go, but Thierry could feel the connection, even if it was faint. For the first time in years, he felt like there was a possibility, however fragile, of building something new. As they stood to leave, Thierry looked at Claire, his heart full of gratitude for the small chance she had given him. Thank you, he said softly, for giving me this chance. Claire didn't respond right away, but there was a small, genuine smile on her lips as they left the cafe. The days following their lunch were quieter, but the awkwardness between Thierry and Claire lingered. They exchanged pleasantries at the office, but their conversations rarely went beyond surface level. Thierry could feel the thin thread of connection they'd started to build, but it still felt fragile, as if any wrong move could break it. Thierry wanted more, needed more. His guilt had been consuming him since the day Claire revealed the truth. He had missed so much of her life, and it gnawed at him daily. Every time he saw her moving quietly through the office, it reminded him of the years he had lost, years he could never get back. But the fact that Claire had given him a chance to know her, to be part of her life in some way, kept him going. Yet, despite her willingness to try, Thierry knew she was still holding back. It wasn't enough for her to agree to lunches and polite conversation. He wanted to break through the wall that still stood between them, the wall that his past mistakes had built. He needed to feel closer to her, to be more than just two people sharing an awkward meal. One afternoon, when the tension of the day had already worn him down, Thierry decided to make another attempt at closing the gap. He knew it was risky. He didn't want to push her too hard, didn't want to ruin the delicate progress they had made, but he couldn't sit back any longer, watching her drift further from him. Thierry caught Claire in the hallway as she was finishing up her day. She seemed surprised to see him waiting for her outside the staff area, but she didn't hesitate when he asked to speak with her. "I was wondering if you'd like to join me for dinner tonight," Thierry suggested, trying to keep his tone light, though his heart raced with the weight of his own desperation. "I know we've been taking things slow, but I'd really like to spend more time with you." Claire hesitated, her brows knitting together. "Dinner? I don't know, Thierry. I've got some things I need to do tonight." Thierry felt the disappointment rising, but he fought to keep his voice steady. "I understand. I just thought maybe we could try something a bit more relaxed, outside of work. I'm not trying to pressure you, but I don't want to miss any more time. We've already lost so much." Claire's expression softened, but there was still that distance in her eyes. She let out a small sigh. "It's not that I don't want to spend time with you, it's just, I'm not sure what you're expecting from this. Thierry, I told you before, I've moved on. I don't need you to try to fix things that can't be fixed." Her words felt like a punch to the gut. Thierry had heard them before, but hearing them again felt like a confirmation of something he wasn't ready to accept. He had tried so hard to make up for the lost years, but the more he pushed, the more he realized that Claire didn't need him in the way he needed her. "I'm not trying to fix the past," Thierry said, his voice quieter now, almost pleading. "I know I can't, but I'm trying to be here now. I don't want to keep missing out on your life." Claire looked at him, her eyes filled with a kind of sadness he hadn't seen before. "Thierry, I don't know what you're hoping for. I'm willing to get to know you, but you have to understand. Our relationship isn't going to be what you want it to be. You're not going to be my father in the way you imagine." Thierry felt his chest tighten, the reality of her words cutting deep. "I just want to be in your life," he said softly, his voice cracking slightly. "Whatever that looks like. I need to feel like I'm doing something, that I'm trying to make up for everything I've missed." Claire's eyes softened, and for a moment, she looked like she was going to say something, but then she stopped, shaking her head slightly. "I understand that you feel guilty. I get that. But you can't make up for the past by trying to force something now. I don't need a father, Thierry. I've been okay without one." Her words hung in the air, thick with finality. Thierry felt a lump rising in his throat, the helplessness he had tried so hard to avoid now flooding him. Claire didn't need him. She had never needed him. And now, after everything, it seemed that no matter what he did, he couldn't change that. "I'm sorry," Claire said softly, her voice tinged with regret. "I'm not trying to hurt you. I know you're trying, and I appreciate it. But I think you need to come to terms with the fact that we can't have the relationship you're hoping for." Thierry blinked, struggling to keep his emotions in check. "So what now?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "What am I supposed to do?" Claire looked at him for a long moment, her expression unreadable. "I don't know, Thierry. I think that's something you have to figure out for yourself." There was a heavy silence between them, the weight of everything left unsaid pressing down like a cloud. Thierry's mind raced, searching for something, anything, to say that would make this moment less painful. But there was nothing. Nothing he could say that would change the truth. Claire gave him a small, almost sad smile before stepping past him, her footsteps quiet as she walked away. Thierry didn't move, didn't turn to watch her leave. He stood there, alone in the hallway, the reality of her words crashing down on him like a tidal wave. For the first time in his life, Thierry realized that there were some things he simply couldn't control. No amount of power, no amount of money could fix the broken connection between him and his daughter. He had waited too long, missed too many moments, and now, no matter how much he wanted it, Claire would never need him the way he needed her. As he stood there, the emptiness he had tried so hard to fill with work and success felt more crushing than ever before. He had spent his life chasing wealth and power, but none of that mattered now. He had lost the one thing that could have truly made him feel whole, and there was nothing he could do to bring it back. The days that followed Thierry's conversation with Claire were some of the longest of his life. He found himself haunted by their words, playing the conversation over and over in his mind, trying to figure out where he had gone wrong. But deep down, he knew the truth. He hadn't gone wrong in that moment. The mistakes had been made long before, and now he was simply facing the consequences. Claire continued to work in the office, but their interactions had grown even more distant. The thread of connection that had once seemed fragile now felt entirely severed. Thierry could sense her pulling further away, and with each passing day, the hope he had clung to began to slip from his grasp. One morning, just as Thierry was about to begin another day of meetings, Jacqueline, his assistant, knocked on his office door. "Mr. Dubois," she said hesitantly as she stepped inside, holding an envelope in her hands. "I thought you should see this." Thierry glanced up from his desk, his brow furrowing in confusion. "What is it?" "It's from Claire," Jacqueline said softly, placing the envelope on his desk. "She gave it to me this morning." Thierry's heart sank as he reached for the envelope. He already knew what it was before he even opened it. There was a finality in the way Jacqueline had spoken, a heaviness that told him this wasn't just a simple note. With trembling hands, Thierry opened the envelope and unfolded the letter inside. Claire's handwriting was neat and precise, and as he began to read, the weight of her words pressed down on him like a lead blanket. "Thierry, I've thought a lot about everything you've said, and I know you're trying. I appreciate the effort you've made to be part of my life, but after everything, I think it's best if we go our separate ways. This isn't about anger or resentment. I don't hate you, and I don't blame you for the choices you made in the past. But I've lived my whole life without you, and I've come to terms with that. Trying to force a relationship now feels wrong. It feels like we're both trying to make up for something that can't be fixed. I don't want to hurt you, and I know this probably isn't what you want to hear, but I need to move forward with my life. I need to let go of the past and live my life on my own terms, without the weight of what could have been hanging over me. So, I've decided to leave the company. I've found another job. Something that will give me the space I need to grow and heal. I want you to know that I don't have any hard feelings. I'm not leaving because I'm angry. I just think it's time for both of us to move on. I hope you can understand, and I wish you all the best in the future." Thierry's hand trembled as he finished reading the letter. The words blurred slightly as tears welled up in his eyes, but he blinked them away, refusing to let them fall. This was it. Claire was leaving, and she wasn't coming back. She wasn't angry, she had made that clear, but her departure still felt like the most painful rejection he had ever experienced. He set the letter down on his desk, his mind reeling. He had known, deep down, that this day might come. Claire had always been clear about her boundaries, about the fact that she didn't need him in the way he had hoped she would, but knowing it didn't make it hurt any less. Thierry stood up and walked to the window, staring out at the Paris skyline. The city seemed so alive, so full of movement and opportunity, yet here he was, standing in the middle of his empire, feeling more alone than he had ever felt in his life. For years, he had built his life around success, power, and wealth. He had believed that those things would make him invincible, that they would shield him from the pain of human connection. But now, faced with the truth of his own failures, he realized how hollow that belief had been. Claire wasn't leaving because she hated him. She was leaving because she had no place for him in her life. She had moved on, built a life for herself without him. And now, it was clear that he couldn't force his way into that life just because he was ready to face the truth. As Thierry stood there, his mind replayed the moments of his life, the decisions he had made, the people he had hurt along the way. He had always thought that he was in control, that he could shape his own destiny through sheer willpower. But now, looking back, he realized that the most important things had slipped through his fingers without him even noticing. He thought of Marie, Claire's mother, and the life she had led without him. He thought of Claire, growing up without knowing her father, without ever having the chance to experience the love and support that he could have given her. And now, after all this time, the chance was gone. Thierry felt a wave of regret wash over him, heavier than any business failure or financial loss he had ever experienced. He had spent his life chasing success, but in doing so, he had lost the one thing that could have truly mattered, the chance to be there for the people who needed him. But Claire was right. He couldn't fix the past. He couldn't force her to let him into her life now. She had made her choice, and he had to respect that. Thierry closed his eyes, feeling the weight of his solitude pressing down on him. He didn't know what the future held, but one thing was clear. He couldn't go back to the man he had been before. The man who had believed that power and money were the only things that mattered. As he stood there, staring out at the city, Thierry knew that he had to let Claire go. He had to accept that this was the end of their story, at least for now. He had lost her once before, and now he had lost her again. But this time, he wouldn't try to hold on. He wouldn't try to fix what couldn't be fixed. Claire had her life, and now Thierry had to figure out how to live his.